At 79, Hayley Mills finally broke her silence. For decades, she was the smiling face of innocence. Disney's golden child, the bright spark of Pollyanna, and the Parent Trap, a living embodiment of hope and happiness. But behind those perfect smiles and carefully lit sets was a young girl quietly learning about power, pressure, and the impossible standards of a world run by adults. And standing beside her through that strange, glittering maze of early fame was one woman who would change her forever, the fiery Irish legend, Maureen O'Hara. To the world, O'Hara was untouchable. Bold, commanding, the very definition of old Hollywood strength. But to young Hayley, she was something far more complicated, both terrifying and tender, a mirror of everything the child star feared she might one day become. For years, Hayley never spoke publicly about their bond or the lessons that shaped her during those formative days on Disney sets. But as time wore on, and as age brought a kind of quiet courage, she decided to tell the truth. About fame, about womanhood, and about the woman who taught her what resilience really means. Her voice trembled as she recalled O'Hara's blazing red hair, her impossible standards, her laughter that could shake the set. "She wasn't just my co-star," Hayley said softly. "She was my protector and my warning." It wasn't the story the public expected from the ever-smiling girl who charmed the world, but it was the truth. And it would reveal a side of both women that Hollywood never wanted anyone to see. The truth Hayley Mills carried for nearly 60 years is both heartbreaking and beautiful. And it begins here, where innocence met fire. Before the fame, before the applause that echoed across continents, Hayley Mills was simply a little girl growing up in a home where art and performance weren't dreams. They were the air everyone breathed. Born on the 18th of April, 1946, in London, she was the daughter of two giants of British theatre, Sir John Mills, a man whose quiet strength made him one of cinema's most respected actors, and Mary Hayley Bell, a novelist and playwright with a mind as sharp as her pen. Their home pulsed with dialogue, scripts, and stage lights. It wasn't an ordinary childhood, it was a living rehearsal for destiny. From the moment Hayley could walk, she was surrounded by storytelling. Her father would return from film sets with tales of distant locations and late-night rehearsals. Her mother wrote plays that explored the human heart with tenderness and wit. Every conversation, every dinner, carried the rhythm of the stage. It was inevitable that Hayley would find her own way to the screen, but no one, not even her parents, could have predicted how quickly she would captivate the world. At just 12 years old, Hayley made her film debut alongside her father in Tiger Bay, 1959. The story of a young girl caught in a web of adult secrets became the perfect stage for her raw, natural talent. She didn't act, she simply existed before the camera, with a truth that astonished critics. That performance caught the eye of a man who had built an empire on innocence and imagination, Walt Disney. When Disney saw Tiger Bay, he reportedly said, "That girl has magic in her eyes." Within months, Hayley was on a plane to Hollywood, stepping into a world where dreams and danger looked the same. Her debut in Pollyanna, 1960, didn't just make her a star, it made her a symbol. The sunny optimism of that character, her unshakable belief in kindness, became both her blessing and her curse. Hollywood adored her. The Academy crowned her with a juvenile Oscar. Audiences across the globe saw in her the perfect child, untainted, angelic, a promise that innocence could still exist in a cynical world. Yet, behind the glow of camera lights, Hayley felt the first tremors of something darker. The loss of self that often comes when the world insists on telling you who you are. That duality, the joy and the fear, followed her into The Parent Trap, 1961. Playing identical twins, Hayley didn't just prove she could act, she became a technical marvel. The film was a triumph, a celebration of her charm and discipline. But on set, something unexpected happened. There was another presence, towering, magnetic, and intimidating, the legendary Maureen O'Hara. O'Hara, already a veteran of Hollywood epics like The Quiet Man, was the polar opposite of Hayley's on-screen innocence. She was fierce, unapologetic, and utterly in control. To the young British actress, O'Hara was both a mentor and a mystery. Watching her was like glimpsing the future, a glimpse of what it meant to survive in an industry that rarely showed mercy. At first, their relationship was formal. O'Hara, with her striking red hair and commanding voice, demanded respect on set. She treated the crew with firmness, her young co-star with a measured distance. But over time, Hayley began to see what lay beneath that steel exterior. A woman who had endured, who had fought to keep her dignity in a business that tried to take it from her. It was a friendship forged not in sentiment, but in understanding. And decades later, when Hayley finally spoke of Maureen O'Hara, it wasn't with gossip or nostalgia, it was with reverence. Because what O'Hara taught her went far beyond acting. She taught her survival. As Hayley once confessed, Maureen showed me that you could be gentle and strong, kind and unyielding all at once. She didn't teach with words, she taught by existing. But that lesson came at a cost. For Hayley, the years that followed would test everything O'Hara had prepared her for the struggle for identity, love, and truth in a world that never stopped watching. And soon, the girl the world adored would learn that even fairy tales cast shadows. Hayley Mills's childhood was a paradox, part fairy tale, part pressure cooker. While other children played in the streets, she played beneath stage lights, surrounded by scripts, actors, and conversations about art and fame. Her home wasn't filled with toys. It was filled with creativity, wit, and the ghosts of Shakespeare, Dickens, and every playwright her parents ever brought to life. Her father, Sir John Mills, was already a pillar of British cinema by the time she was born. He was the kind of man whose quiet performances spoke volumes, humble, graceful, never needing to raise his voice to command attention. Her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, was equally formidable, a writer whose plays were filled with the same emotional honesty that would later define her daughter's performances. Together, they created an environment that was nurturing, yet demanding a space where brilliance was expected, not merely admired. Hayley often described her early home life as a rehearsal that never ended. Conversations revolved around scripts, rehearsals, or her father's next film. She would watch him prepare his lines late into the night, studying how he transformed words into something alive. From her mother, she inherited imagination. From her father, discipline. It was a combination that would carry her into the highest echelons of fame and almost break her in the process. By the time she turned 12, her life was already unlike anyone else's. When she was cast opposite her father in the 1959 film Tiger Bay, the set became both playground and classroom. The director, J. Lee Thompson, had originally planned to cast an unknown local girl until he met Hayley. Her natural ability to listen, to feel before she spoke, was undeniable. In the film, she played Gilly, a young girl who witnesses a murder but forms an unlikely friendship with the killer. The role demanded emotional depth, fear, innocence, and courage, qualities that would define her screen persona for years to come. When Tiger Bay premiered, audiences were captivated. Critics hailed her as a revelation, and the Times wrote that she possessed a maturity that cannot be taught. But the moment that would change her life forever came when Walt Disney watched the film. Sitting in his Burbank office thousands of miles away, Disney reportedly leaned forward during a screening and said, "That child is pure magic." He saw in her what he had built his entire empire upon: sincerity. Within weeks, he reached out to the Mills family and offered Hayley a contract. For the young girl from London, the idea of working for Disney seemed like stepping into a dream. In 1960, she arrived in Hollywood bright-eyed, polite, a symbol of British charm. But Hollywood, even Disney's version of it, was a strange and seductive world. It offered wonder and danger in equal measure. The studio system, polished and smiling on the outside, could be ruthless behind closed doors. Every gesture, every photograph, every word spoken in public had to be perfect. Her first role for Disney was Pollyanna, the story of an orphan who teaches an entire town to find joy. It was a character perfectly tailored to Hayley's nature, open-hearted, curious, and endlessly optimistic. Her performance melted audiences across the world. She wasn't acting, she was Pollyanna. She radiated a purity that felt almost supernatural. The film's success turned her into an international sensation overnight. Yet with that fame came something she couldn't yet understand: ownership. People didn't just love her, they claimed her. Walt Disney adored her, and the studio molded her public image with precision. She became the face of childhood innocence, the proof that virtue could still exist in cinema. When she won the Academy Juvenile Award for her role, she stood on stage, barely tall enough to reach the microphone, clutching her golden statuette with trembling hands. The applause was deafening, But what no one saw were the questions already forming in her young mind. Who am I when I'm not smiling? Who am I when the cameras stop? In the years that followed, she starred in The Parent Trap, In Search of the Castaways, and Summer Magic, each film reinforcing the image of Hayley Mills as Disney's perfect daughter. But perfection is heavy. Behind the joyful songs and technicolor backdrops, she began to feel the quiet ache of a child forced to grow up on screen before she could grow up in life. Her mother once said, "Fame doesn't change who you are. It changes the people around you." For Hayley, that truth came early. Her friendships became distant, her privacy vanished, and every misstep was magnified. Even her laughter, so natural in her early films, began to feel rehearsed. Still, she pressed on. Acting was no longer play, it was purpose. And deep down, she understood that the world would never again see her as just a girl from London. She belonged to the audience now, their creation, their dream. Yet beneath all the sparkle of youth and success, something real and tender still lingered. Her curiosity about people, her quiet yearning for authenticity. It was this sensitivity that would later draw her to Maureen O'Hara, a woman who embodied the strength Hayley would one day need to survive. And though she didn't know it yet, the lessons O'Hara would teach her would become the blueprint for how to endure Hollywood's brightest lights and its darkest shadows. By the early 1960s, Hayley Mills was no longer just a talented child actress, she was a global phenomenon. Her face smiled from movie posters in every language, her voice filled radio interviews, and her name was uttered with the same reverence once reserved for Shirley Temple. Yet behind that radiant fame was a young girl still trying to figure out where the performance ended and where she began. After Pollyanna swept audiences off their feet in 1960, Disney wasted no time in crafting her next cinematic showcase. The project was ambitious and technically daring, The Parent Trap, 1961. Hayley would play not one, but two characters, identical twins separated at birth, each raised in a different world, who accidentally meet at summer camp and conspire to reunite their estranged parents. It was a role that demanded precision, charm, and endless patience. For hours each day, she acted opposite an invisible twin, her timing exact, her emotions mirrored. The technical feat was groundbreaking for its time, yet the real miracle was Hayley herself. She made audiences believe in those sisters so completely that even critics forgot the trickery behind the camera. The film was a phenomenon, one of Disney's biggest hits of the decade. Suddenly, Hayley Mills wasn't just a star, she was a brand. But success carries weight, especially for someone still in her teens. Between premieres and press tours, she was rarely allowed to be alone. Disney's publicity team shaped every aspect of her life, the way she spoke, dressed, and even smiled. She became the embodiment of innocence, and the pressure to remain that way was suffocating. Every headline described her as wholesome, sweet, angelic. No one wanted to imagine that the girl who played Pollyanna might one day grow up. That tension, the fight between girlhood and womanhood, shadowed her next few films. In Search of the Castaways, 1962, Summer Magic, 1963, and That Darn Cat, 1965, all reinforced her image as Disney's eternal optimist. The studio carefully avoided giving her roles that hinted at romance or rebellion, yet Hayley herself was changing. She was reading serious literature, listening to the Beatles, and quietly yearning for complexity. In private, she began to push back. She wanted roles that reflected who she was becoming, a young woman with questions, flaws, and desires. She found that chance in The Family Way, 1966, a small British film directed by Roy Bolting. It was a daring choice, breaking sharply from her Disney persona. The story explored the awkwardness and vulnerability of newlyweds, topics far removed from the innocence of her past. The film caused a sensation. Some critics were shocked. Others applauded her courage. For Hayley, it was liberation, proof that she could step outside the golden cage Walt Disney had built for her. But liberation has its price. During the making of The Family Way, she met Roy Bolting himself, a director more than 3 decades older than her. He was charming, articulate, and experienced everything she was not. Their relationship raised eyebrows across Britain. The 20-year-old starlet and the 53-year-old filmmaker became tabloid fodder overnight. Some called it scandalous. Others whispered that he was manipulating her. Yet Hayley defended the relationship fiercely. He understood me, she would later say. He treated me like an adult when no one else would. They married in 1971. To outsiders, it seemed another Hollywood oddity, youth and experience colliding under public scrutiny. But to Hayley, it was another act of rebellion, her declaration of independence from the Disney image that had defined her life. For a time, their life together was gentle, filled with countryside walks, late-night talks, and creative collaboration. Their home, a windmill in Buckinghamshire, became a symbol of her unconventional freedom. Yet cracks soon appeared. Their age gap, once brushed aside, became a canyon. Roy wanted stability. Hayley craved rediscovery. She was still searching for who she might be without the expectations of the world pressing down on her shoulders. By 1977, the marriage was over. They parted amicably, but the experience left her wiser and more solitary. That same year, she became a mother. Her son, Crispian Mills, inherited her love for art and performance, though he would later channel it through music rather than film. In the 1,990 seconds, he formed Kula Shaker, a band that fused British rock with Indian mysticism. When Hayley watched him perform years later, she reportedly said, "He has what I always wanted, the courage to be unapologetically himself." After the divorce, Hayley's career entered a quieter phase. She worked steadily in theater and television, but no longer chased Hollywood glamour. Fame had given her everything and taken just as much. Yet even as she stepped away from the spotlight, her legend endured. To millions, she would forever be the girl who made the world believe in goodness. Still, there was one memory she carried with her wherever she went, one that connected her not to the innocence of Disney, but to the fierce spirit of another woman, Maureen O'Hara. The bond they had formed on The Parent Trap all those years ago had never left her. O'Hara was unlike anyone Hayley had ever met. She wasn't afraid to raise her voice, to challenge directors, to demand respect in a time when women were expected to smile and stay quiet. To a young Hayley, she was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. "I remember thinking she was made of fire," Hayley said in an interview decades later. "But when she looked at me, really looked, I saw kindness behind the strength." It was O'Hara who taught her that strength and femininity were not opposites, they were partners. "She showed me how to hold my ground," Hayley recalled. She said, "Never let anyone make you smaller than you are, darling." That advice became Hayley's quiet mantra in the years that followed through love, loss, and reinvention. And it was that same strength, learned from Maureen O'Hara, that allowed her to survive the shifting tides of fame long after the world stopped calling her Pollyanna. But as she grew older, one truth lingered, unspoken. For all the roles she played, for all the lessons she learned, one story remained untold: the truth about her friendship with the woman who had shaped her most. And at 79, Hayley Mills finally decided it was time to tell it. At the height of the 1,960 seconds, Hayley Mills stood at a summit very few ever reached and even fewer survived. She was not just a star, she was the embodiment of light, innocence, and the golden age of Disney. Her name carried weight in every household that had ever known laughter and comfort flickering on a cinema screen. To millions of children, she wasn't a performer, she was a friend. And yet, as the world fell deeper in love with her smile, the girl behind it began to fade quietly into the background. The Parent Trap had sealed her fate as Disney's perfect daughter. The film became a cultural phenomenon, beloved across continents and languages. Critics praised her for a double act of dazzling precision, but what they didn't see was the invisible work beneath the magic. The lonely hours repeating scenes, the exhaustion of being two people at once, the expectation to remain perpetually sweet. On set, amid the laughter and the lens, Maureen O'Hara became her silent compass. O'Hara was everything Hayley wasn't yet allowed to be: outspoken, fierce, and unafraid of confrontation. She walked onto set with the commanding poise of a queen and the aura of someone who had already fought and won 100 unseen battles. To young Hayley, Maureen was mesmerizing. She was intimidating, yes, but magnetic. When she entered the room, Hayley later recalled, it was as if the air shifted to make space for her. O'Hara carried herself like a woman who had no intention of apologizing for her strength, and it showed in everything from the way she looked directors straight in the eye to the subtle defiance in her smile. During filming, O'Hara noticed Hayley's hesitance, that quiet, dutiful politeness drilled into every child star. Between takes, she would lean down and whisper advice that stayed with Hayley for decades. "You don't owe the world your innocence," she once said. "You owe it your truth. It is late, forget the Wanson." It was a radical thing to hear in an era that worshiped purity, especially within the Disney machine, where perfection was currency. But O'Hara didn't believe in polished illusions. She believed in authenticity, in grit, in earning your space. Their dynamic on set mirrored their characters. Maureen, the elegant, world-weary mother, carried authority. Hayley, the spirited daughters, brought light and mischief. But off-camera, something beautiful formed between them, a bond not of equals but of reflection. Maureen saw in Hayley a version of herself long before the battles, before the headlines, before the studio bosses who tried to dim her light. Hayley, in turn, saw in Maureen a blueprint of the kind of woman she might one day need to become. Strong enough to command respect, gentle enough to still believe in beauty. As The Parent Trap became one of the decade's biggest successes, Hayley's fame reached fever pitch. She was invited to the White House, interviewed by every major magazine, and adored by an entire generation. Yet, with every smile captured for publicity, she carried Maureen's words like armor. She began to notice how differently Hollywood treated its women. Male actors were celebrated for aging. Women were punished for it. Men were called commanding. Women were called difficult. And even at her young age, Hayley sensed that beneath all the applause, there was an unspoken expiration date for every woman in the industry. It was something Maureen O'Hara knew too well. By the time The Parent Trap was released, O'Hara's own career was beginning to shift. She was still admired, but the roles offered to her were changing: fewer heroines, more mothers, fewer leading ladies, more nostalgia pieces. Hollywood, as always, had little mercy for women over 40. Hayley watched her navigate that shift with quiet grace. Maureen never complained, never pandered. She didn't chase approval, Hayley once said. She earned respect by never begging for it, and perhaps that's why their friendship endured, not through sentimentality, but through shared resilience. O'Hara would often invite Hayley to sit beside her during breaks, sharing stories of Ireland, her days filming with John Ford, and the endless fights she'd had to protect her dignity in an industry built by men. "She told me once," Hayley recalled years later, "that she was tired of people calling her temper Irish fire. She said it wasn't temper, it was survival." Letters Channels of Sep. 10/4. That lesson burned itself into Hayley's heart. In the years that followed, as she tried to navigate love, fame, and her own identity, she returned to that idea that strength wasn't arrogance, it was self-respect wearing armor. By the late 1960s, as the Cultural Revolution swept across the world, Hayley felt herself changing too. The roles that once came so easily began to feel hollow. The Disney sheen was fading, replaced by a restless hunger for authenticity. She wanted to play real people with real flaws. She wanted to live outside the glass box she'd been built into. When she took on The Family Way, it wasn't rebellion for shock's sake, it was necessity. And though it scandalized the old Disney faithful, it also marked the moment Hayley Mills truly became her own woman. Yet even in her newfound independence, the ghost of Maureen O'Hara lingered not as a haunting, but as a steady light. O'Hara's influence had been less about mentorship and more about inheritance, the passing of an unspoken torch from one generation of women to the next. Decades later, when Hayley spoke publicly about their relationship for the first time, her words were tinged with emotion and regret. "She didn't just teach me how to act," Hayley said. "She taught me how to be, how to stand tall, even when the world tells you to shrink." The golden girl of Disney had grown up, but the woman she became, wise, thoughtful, quietly defiant, was shaped as much by her triumphs as by the red-haired legend who once stood beside her on a Hollywood set and said, "You've got this, darling." And yet, every rise carries a shadow. For Hayley, the cost of fame would soon come calling in lost love, fading youth, and the cruel realization that every spotlight eventually burns out. The glittering lights that once crowned Hayley Mills slowly dimmed, not with scandal or disgrace, but with the quiet erosion of fame, the kind that steals you softly, day by day. In the 1,970 seconds, the little girl who had embodied joy and innocence for a generation found herself standing in the ruins of the same fairy tale Hollywood had written for her. She had outgrown the story, but the world refused to let her leave it. It began subtly. Film offers became fewer, and the scripts that did arrive were pale imitations of her earlier triumphs. Producers still saw her as Pollyanna, not as a woman with a mind, heart, and history. The radiant Disney glow that had once opened every door was now a gilded cage. They wanted me to stay 15 forever, she later confessed. But I was already 25, divorced, and raising a son. Her marriage to Roy Bolting, once a romantic rebellion, began to crumble under the weight of their differences. He was an established filmmaker nearing 60. She was a young woman just beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had. Lost her privacy, her freedom, her childhood. What began as mentorship became mentorship's shadow, control. He loved her, yes, but also shaped her, edited her like a film he couldn't stop cutting. By 1977, their divorce was finalized. The tabloids feasted on the story, painting her as the once golden girl who'd fallen into a scandalous age-gap marriage, then failed. Hayley, ever dignified, refused to lash back. "He gave me courage," she said simply. "And sometimes courage hurts. Less in the rawls." In those years, she began to confront what most child stars never survive, the identity crisis that comes when the applause fades. She had been adored before she ever truly knew herself. Now, stripped of that validation, she faced a silence that was both terrifying and necessary. She turned to the stage, small theaters, traveling productions, the kind of work that doesn't make headlines but heals the soul. It was there, under simpler lights, that she found something she hadn't felt in years: honesty. The stage didn't care who she had been. It only cared who she was now. Yet even as she rebuilt herself, she couldn't escape the shadow of Hollywood's cruelty toward aging women. Roles for actresses her age were scarce, and the same studios that once celebrated her now ignored her calls. "It was like being a ghost at my own premiere," she said years later. Her career wasn't the only thing slipping away. The fortune she had earned as Disney's brightest star was largely gone. In her memoir, Hayley revealed the painful truth. Due to complex trust arrangements and taxes, she had lost nearly all her earnings by the time she turned 21. "I was too young to understand contracts," she wrote. "The world called me successful, but I couldn't even afford a flat." That revelation struck her deeply, not just as a financial loss, but as an emotional betrayal. She had given her childhood to the screen, and in return, it had taken her youth and her innocence. "I don't regret the work," she once said, "but I do regret how easily I was owned." In the midst of this personal reckoning, tragedy struck again, this time from afar. Maureen O'Hara, the woman who had once been her cinematic mother and real-life mentor, began to fade from the public eye. The proud, fiery Irish icon who had stood tall against the Hollywood machine was retreating into silence. For Hayley, that news stirred something deep. She had often wondered if Maureen had faced the same ache, the quiet heartbreak of watching the industry you helped build move on without you. O'Hara had always seemed indestructible, a fortress of dignity, but as the years passed, Hayley began to see that even fortresses crumble in time. In interviews, she would speak of Maureen not as an idol, but as a mirror. "She fought for her respect every single day," Hayley said. "She showed me that being strong doesn't protect you from pain, it just lets you face it with your head held high." When O'Hara passed away in 2015, Hayley described feeling a sudden emptiness, like a lighthouse had gone out. It wasn't just grief. It was the end of an era, the final closing of a chapter written in the golden ink of old Hollywood. In her later interviews, Hayley revealed something few knew. During The Parent Trap, Maureen had given her a handwritten note, folded small enough to hide in her palm. It read, "You are not what they make of you. You are who you choose to become." For years, Hayley kept that note tucked inside a script, worn, yellowed, but never forgotten. That note became a talisman through her hardest years, through the loss of fame, fortune, and the illusions of youth. It was a voice that reminded her she was more than a photograph, more than a role, more than the girl the world refused to let grow up. Her tragedies were never loud or tabloid-driven. They were quiet ones, the kind that unfold in private, beneath polite smiles and graceful interviews. But perhaps that was her greatest strength. She endured without spectacle. And slowly, almost invisibly, Hayley Mills transformed tragedy into wisdom. By the 1,990 seconds, she had found love again, not in fame, but in companionship. Her partner, actor Firdous Bamji, was 20 years her junior, but age had ceased to matter. What joined them wasn't rebellion this time, it was understanding. "We share stories," she said. "That's all I ever wanted, someone who listens." As the years went on, she spoke more openly about her journey, not with bitterness, but with calm acceptance. "You can't live in the applause forever," she said softly in one interview. "At some point, you have to learn to clap for yourself." And when she finally decided to tell the world about Maureen O'Hara, the woman who once terrified her, then saved her, it wasn't out of nostalgia. It was an act of closure. Because the truth about Maureen wasn't just a story about another star. It was a story about every woman who learns to survive her own myth. The world remembered Hayley Mills as the girl who made us believe in happiness. But the woman she became was far more extraordinary. Someone who discovered, through pain and loss, that resilience is its own kind of magic. And behind that strength, still burning in her memory, was Maureen's voice, sharp, warm, alive. "You've got this, darling." In the gentle twilight of her life, Hayley Mills has become something the world rarely allows its former child stars to behold. She no longer chases fame, nor mourns its absence. The applause that once deafened her has faded into something softer, gratitude. By the late 1990 seconds, after years of shifting between stage and screen, she found herself drawn back to the theater. Not for the attention, but for the purity of it. "There's honesty on stage," she once said. "It's the one place that still feels real." She performed in plays across Britain and the United States, often choosing roles that mirrored her own journey, women searching for meaning beyond the noise of the world. It was during one of these tours that she met Firdous Bamji, an Indian-American actor and writer. They were performing The King and I, and from the very first rehearsal, something clicked. He was 20 years younger, but the connection ran deeper than age. Both were actors who had learned to live between roles, between identities. They understood the strange loneliness of pretending to be other people for a living. Their love was quiet, the kind that grows without spectacle. Together, they created a life of mutual respect, intellectual curiosity, and shared peace. They've never married, never felt the need. "Love doesn't need labels," Hayley said in an interview. "It just needs kindness and time." While many of her contemporaries faded into obscurity or bitterness, Hayley chose a different path, one of reflection and balance. She became an advocate for the welfare of child performers, speaking candidly about the pressures she endured and the psychological toll of early fame. "Children in the spotlight," she said, "often grow up performing even when the cameras are gone. You forget how to just be." Her words resonated across generations of artists who had followed the same bright but perilous path. She spoke at schools, at industry panels, and in interviews, urging Hollywood to remember that the child inside the star is still a child. In 2000, Disney honored her with the Disney Legends Award, a moment that brought her life full circle. Standing on stage, now a woman of grace and wisdom, she smiled as the audience rose to applaud her. "It's lovely to come home," she said, but it was clear that her idea of home had changed. It wasn't a studio or a stage anymore. It was something quieter, deeper, earned. When asked about Maureen O'Hara's passing in 2015, Hayley's voice trembled slightly. "She was the fire in the room," she said. "I see her in every strong woman I meet." The two women had shared only one film, yet the bond forged in that short time became an invisible thread that lasted a lifetime. Sometimes she still re-watches The Parent Trap, not for nostalgia, but for communion. "I see her there," she said softly. "That twinkle in her eye, that laugh that filled the set. I can almost hear her say, 'You've got this, darling.'" It is a rument. Today at 79, Hayley Mills lives between London and New York, still acting occasionally, still speaking about art and empathy, still carrying the gentleness that made her famous only now. It's grounded in truth. Her beauty has softened, but not dimmed. Her smile still carries the weight of both joy and sorrow. She has become the kind of woman Maureen O'Hara might have admired, unafraid to be herself, unafraid to age, unafraid to remember. The world remembers her as the eternal optimist Pollyanna, but she no longer flinches at the label. "I think she's still part of me," Hayley says, "but now I understand her better. She wasn't naive, she was brave." The little girl who once shone in Technicolor now lives in something subtler, a spectrum of peace, wisdom, and memory. She no longer belongs to Hollywood. She belongs to time itself. And perhaps that is her quietest, most beautiful victory. She grew up, she survived, and she still believes in light. When the story of Hollywood's golden era is told, it often centers on the men who built it or the scandals that broke it. Yet somewhere between those myths stands Hayley Mills not as a tragic cautionary tale, but as a quiet testament to endurance. Her life didn't burn out in rebellion or fade in disgrace. It evolved, gracefully, into something rarer. Her legacy is written in the faces of every child actor who came after her. Those who struggled to outgrow the characters that made them famous, who learned that fame is both gift and curse. Long before it became a headline, Hayley had lived the paradox of child stardom, adored, protected, and trapped all at once. She never blamed Disney for that. In fact, she spoke of Walt with affection. He saw goodness in people, she said. He just didn't know how heavy that goodness could be to carry. She became an advocate for truth in storytelling, urging studios to treat young performers not as commodities, but as collaborators. To her, the danger wasn't fame itself, it was being defined by it. Children grow, she said, but Hollywood doesn't like growth. It likes nostalgia. Her own nostalgia, however, was something different. Not a longing for the spotlight, but a reverence for the people who shaped her. Chief among them, Maureen O'Hara. The relationship between the teenage ingenue and the Irish firebrand became one of the most beautiful, unspoken mentor legacies in cinema. O'Hara didn't coddle her. She challenged her. And through that, she gave her something far more valuable than advice. She gave her backbone. In her later interviews, Hayley often returned to one theme: strength without cruelty. Maureen had a kind of authority that didn't come from ego, she said. It came from truth. She never needed to shout to be heard, she simply was. That lesson rippled through Hayley's life, shaping her both as an artist and as a woman. When critics tried to diminish her, she stayed silent until silence itself became power. When fame grew cold, she warmed herself with purpose. When others complained that Hollywood had forgotten them, she smiled and said, maybe it was time to forget Hollywood. Her influence stretches far beyond her own films. She became an early model of the modern child actor's survival story, one who transitions from innocence to adulthood without implosion. Stars like Jodie Foster, Emma Watson, and Saoirse Ronan have all, knowingly or not, walked paths that Hayley cleared decades before them. They too balance intellect with grace, ambition with self-possession, the same alchemy that once defined a young girl with a British accent and a heart too big for the screen. Even Disney, the studio that both made and confined her, now honors her as part of its mythology. In the archives of the company, she stands beside Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke, not just as a performer, but as an era. The golden girl who proved that charm could be power and that light could survive the passing of youth. In a rare 2020 appearance, Hayley spoke to a group of film students. Her advice was simple, almost poetic. Don't chase being adored. Chase being understood. If you seed the field and ask for men, it was, in essence, the philosophy that Maureen O'Hara had lived by: fierce, self-assured, and unyieldingly authentic. The torch that once passed from the red-haired matriarch to the shy young girl on the Parent Trap set had not gone out. It had merely changed hands. And as time continues its relentless sweep, their bond remains a symbol of two generations of women who refuse to be silenced by the myth of perfection. O'Hara taught Hayley to hold her ground. Hayley taught the world that gentleness could be as defiant as fire. In the grand tapestry of Hollywood, theirs is not the loudest thread, but it is one of the strongest. When you look at Hayley Mills today, silver-haired, softly spoken, still carrying that unmistakable glow, it's easy to forget how much she survived. Hollywood's memory is short. It often remembers the shine but not the scars. Yet Hayley's story reminds us that behind every golden girl is a war quietly fought against the very system that crowned her. Hayley Mills represents something nearly extinct in modern celebrity grace under the slow violence of fame. She didn't erupt into scandal or self-destruction like so many who came after her. She endured by choosing silence, self-reflection, and honesty over spectacle. Her greatest rebellion was refusing to become bitter, and that's where the real tragedy and beauty of her story lies. She lived the impossible paradox of being beloved and misunderstood at the same time. Audiences adored the role she played but rarely saw the woman she was becoming. When she tried to grow up, they punished her for it. When she stayed pure, they dismissed her as shallow. That contradiction destroyed many of her peers. Hayley somehow survived it. What's remarkable isn't just her survival, it's her clarity about what fame cost her. "It gives you everything," she once said, "except yourself." That one line, quiet and unembellished, carries the entire weight of her generation's disillusionment. The child stars of the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds were both miracles and casualties adored by millions, but owned by contracts, by images, by the idea of perfection. And perhaps the most haunting thread in her journey is how deeply Maureen O'Hara's influence runs through it all. The older woman saw something in her that few others did, potential not to please but to endure. O'Hara had fought her own battles, studio bosses, typecasting, the slow decay of respect for aging actresses, and she recognized in young Hayley both fragility and strength. Their connection was never about fame. It was about survival. In O'Hara's presence, Hayley witnessed what real power looked like, a woman who could command a room without needing anyone's permission. That power wasn't about volume or vanity, it was moral gravity, the kind that comes from knowing who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. For Hayley, that was the blueprint. Her life after fame, the theater work, the quiet activism, the slow shedding of illusions, all of it traces back to what Maureen taught her. That dignity is not a performance, it's a choice. If we peel back the layers of nostalgia that surround her, we find something deeply modern in her story. In an era obsessed with youth and reinvention, Hayley Mills offers an alternative acceptance. Not the passive kind, but the brave, deliberate kind that says, "I don't need to be who you remember. I need to be who I am now." That is why her legacy endures. She didn't vanish when the spotlight moved on. She simply stepped aside, letting others chase it while she built a life of substance in its shadow. Her journey from Disney darling to thoughtful elder is in many ways a quiet revolution. For every young actor who believes that fame equals fulfillment, Hayley Mills stands as a counterpoint proof that the real victory is learning to outlive the myth. She was never meant to stay frozen in time, and yet, that's how the world remembers her. Forever 15, bright-eyed, smiling. But perhaps that's okay. Maybe that eternal image isn't a cage anymore, but a tribute to the innocence she once embodied and the wisdom she earned by surviving it. Hayley Mills may have begun as a symbol of light, but she became something rarer, a survivor of light's burn. And when she speaks of Maureen O'Hara, her voice softens, as if invoking a ghost not of loss, but of gratitude. "She was my guide," Hayley said once, "and I hope in some way I've carried her fire forward." And she has. Every word she speaks, every quiet smile she gives in interviews, carries a trace of that Irish flame proof that strength and kindness can coexist, and that the truest legends aren't always the loudest ones. Time has a way of softening even the brightest legends, like sunlight fading on old film reels. Hayley Mills, once the embodiment of cinematic innocence, now moves through the world with the serenity of someone who has made peace with every version of herself. The child, the star, the wife, the mother, the survivor. Her laughter carries a quiet wisdom, a melody tempered by years of light and shadow. She has long stopped measuring her life by premieres or headlines. Instead, she measures it by small human things. A letter from a fan who says Pollyanna helped them through grief. A stranger who smiles and says their mother made them watch The Parent Trap. A young actor who admits she inspired them to stay true to themselves. Those moments are her currency, now gentle, priceless, and enduring. When asked once if she would change anything about her journey, she paused for a long time before answering. "I might have protected myself more," she said, "but then I wouldn't have learned as much. You can't regret the things that made you real." That line feels like the epitaph of an era, a quiet elegy for a generation of stars who lived under impossible light. For Hayley, the past is not something to escape, but something to understand. Every frame, every smile, every heartbreak was a brushstroke in the portrait of a woman who refused to break. And somewhere, in that fading glow of memory, stands Maureen O'Hara, her on-screen mother, her real-life mentor, her silent companion across time. The red-haired firebrand, whose laughter once echoed across a Disney set, is gone, but never truly absent. Hayley still feels her there in the courage to speak honestly, in the dignity she carries into every interview, in the fire that flickers just behind her gentleness. Theirs was not just a collaboration, but a passing of spirit from one kind of woman to another, from the storm to the calm after. Maureen taught her that strength and softness could live in the same heart, that truth was more powerful than fame, and that survival, graceful, unpublicized survival, is its own form of art. Now, when Hayley looks back on her life, she no longer sees tragedy. She sees a mosaic, fragments of beauty, loss, and endurance stitched together by time. The world remembers her as the bright-eyed child who made them believe in goodness. But those who listen closely hear something deeper, the voice of a woman who walked through the ruins of fame and came out shining still. And perhaps that's the final, haunting secret of Hayley Mills and Maureen O'Hara, that the real story was never about the movies they made, but the women they became because of them. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now, you know.